This is Taiwan, and depending on who you ask, the island is either an independent country or a part of the People's Republic of China. But while the notion of Taiwanese independence is controversial for some nowadays, which apparently includes Mars Wrigley, this is not the only time that questions over the exact nature of the island's political status have been raised. In fact, it was during the aftermath of the 1894 Sino-Japanese War and subsequent signing of the Treaty of Shimonoseki, which in effect gave Taiwan and the Penghu Islands to a then rapidly expanding Imperial Japan, the people of Taiwan, unhappy with their abandonment by Qing dynasty China and the looming prospect of Japanese occupation, decided it was time they take control of their own political destiny. On May 23, 1895, they did exactly that, formally declaring the Republic of Formosa. The name Formosa coming from a 1542 description of the then uncharted island by Portuguese sailors, which they called Ilha Formosa, meaning beautiful island. Taiwan, in contrast, comes from a Dutch name for a coastal sandbar near modern-day Anping, which they named after a Taiwanese Aboriginal tribe who more than likely were the indigenous Taiwan people. Whatever the case, the name Taiwan became official in early 1684 with the establishment of Taiwan Prefecture centered around Tainan in the island's southwest. However, many outside China itself still did continue to call the island Formosa well into the 20th century. The First Sino-Japanese War began in 1894, following the Donghak Rebellion, in which members of a Neo-Confucian group, the Donghak, attempted to seize power in Korea, or Joseon. As Joseon, officially Great Joseon, was then still a tributary state of China, it asked Peking for assistance in putting down the rebellion. Japan, which following acquisition of the Kuril Islands in 1875 and Ryukyu Islands in 1879, had been waiting for just such an opportunity, however. When roughly 2,500 Chinese soldiers arrived in Korea, Tokyo protested, arguing that Beijing had violated the Convention of Tientsin by not informing the Japanese government of its actions. And so, Japan soon sent its own expeditionary force to Korea in early June 1894, with 4,000 soldiers and 500 Marines landing at Chulmopo, modern Incheon. When the Joseon government demanded that Tokyo withdraw its forces, the Japanese refused and later occupied Seoul. Following this, a new pro-Japanese regime was installed, which China rejected out of hand as illegitimate. It wasn't long after this, however, the Chinese found themselves on the losing side of a war with a more disciplined Japanese military equipped with the latest modern weaponry. And even before the fighting came to an end, rumors began to spread that Japan wanted Taiwan and the Penghu Islands. The Chinese, for their part, played for time during negotiations, hoping that one of the European powers or even the United States would intervene on their behalf. When that didn't happen, the British were approached to see if they would take temporary guardianship of Taiwan. This didn't work either, and by April 17, 1895, China signed off on the Treaty of Shimonoseki, giving Japan sovereignty over Taiwan and the Penghu Islands in perpetuity. Now, the people of Taiwan were not exactly happy about the prospect of Japanese occupation, and when Tang Jingsong, the local governor, made the terms of the handover known, hundreds flooded his office demanding Peking not ratify the treaty. However, it was too late, and as per Tang's announcement, it now seemed Taiwan would be turned over to Japan within 2 months. A certain Qiu Fengjia would nonetheless come to spearhead a campaign against Peking's perceived abandonment of the island. A Hakka and member of the landed gentry, whose family had arrived from Guangdong around 1680, Qiu had entered the civil service under his mentor and current governor, the previously mentioned Tang. The two soon developed a rivalry, though, viewing each other with mutual suspicion and differed in their response to the Treaty of Shimonoseki. Tang, ever the politician, opted for a more cautious approach, while Qiu passionately argued that under international law, the people of Taiwan should be allowed a plebiscite on self-determination. Tang, whatever his personal misgivings about Qiu, understood the appeal of the latter's message and passed along a memorandum in that effect to Peking. Then, on May 16th, Qiu, with a delegation of notables from central Taiwan, appeared at the governor's office, the Yamen. He demanded that Tang declare Taiwan an independent state and urged him to accept the presidency. While Tang accepted the idea of a declaration of independence, he refused the presidency, believing it would merely be a figurehead post with Qiu wielding real power. Thus, Qiu and his followers took command. Using a telegraph in the governor's office, they sent a brief message to Peking declaring, "The people of Taiwan are resolved to resist subjugation to Japan. They have declared Taiwan an independent republic under the suzerainty of the sacred Qing dynasty." Interestingly, this message seemed to imply the independent republic would maintain a loose relationship with China. However, suzerainty is not the same as sovereignty. Whatever the case, Qiu later sent a follow-up message saying that Tang would, in fact, become the republic's chief executive, while Liu Yongfu, a celebrated commander of the Black Flag Army, would command the island's southern defenses. Peking was not happy, believing that an insurrection on Taiwan would see Japan refuse to return the Liaodong Peninsula, something it should be noted Tokyo only agreed to under the so-called triple intervention of Russia, Germany, and France. Thus, on May 18th, China dispatched a government official to oversee the formal handing over of Taiwan to Japan. This official, however, found it too dangerous to go ashore and so performed the ceremony on a Japanese warship instead. On May 23rd, the Republic of Formosa was formally declared in Taipei, where 2 days later, a national flag showing a tiger on a blue background was unfurled. This, however, did not assuage Qing officials still in Taiwan, and a mass exodus to the mainland began, which, unfortunately for the Republic, included a significant number of imperial troops sent to the island during the Sino-Japanese War. In an attempt to counter this, Tang appointed Yongfu Grand Marshal of the Republic, while Qiu became commander of volunteer militias defending central and northern Taiwan. The Japanese, nonetheless, would land unopposed at Cape Santiago near the village of Odi, some 20 miles southeast of Keelung. From here they marched to Keelung, where after a day of fighting, the Taiwanese garrison, or promotion, let's go with Taiwanese, fell on June 3rd. Part of the problem for the Taiwanese defenders was that most of the militia units were under the command of local warlords who refused to accept outside orders, which in effect meant no broad strategic defensive plan could be implemented up north. And it wasn't long before the road to Taipei was open to the Japanese. At this point, some began to urge Tang to take personal command of the militia forces and wage a guerrilla war against the Japanese, harassing their supply lines with attacks in the mountain passes around Keelung. Tang refused and instead, on June 5th, boarded a German passenger ship with his family bound for the mainland. Taiwanese shore batteries reportedly fired at the ship, the Arthur, as it steamed out of the harbor with the Republic's first enrolling president. Around this time, Qiu, the arguable founding father of the Republic, also boarded a passenger ship, saying he was going to the mainland in order to seek out fresh troops. He eventually made his way to Nanjing and would later play a role in the founding of the Republic of China, but would himself never return to Taiwan. When news of Tang and Qiu's, unexpected departure reached Taipei, the city's defenders went on a rampage, looting and burning the former governor's office. The chaos went unchecked for 2 days, leaving at least 500 people dead. By this point, the merchant community believed anything was better than this and sent a delegation to the Japanese asking them to occupy the city. Shortly thereafter, the Japanese entered Taipei unopposed and on June 17th inaugurated their own administration. Fighting continued down south, however, and following the capture of Hsinchu on June 22nd, the Japanese offensive stalled for a month and a half in face of constant guerrilla attacks. On September 17th, a number of local gentry met in the outskirts of Tainan, where they decided to form a new government with Yongfu as president. Much like Tang, Yongfu refused, although he did in effect become the faltering republic's civilian and military leader. Yongfu organized a basic administration which actually issued its own money and postage stamps, but the Japanese force in Taiwan now numbered some 50,000 men, and Yongfu likely knew he was only forestalling the inevitable. In early October, the Japanese finally made their push towards Tainan, and Yongfu sent a message to the Japanese commander, Major General Kabayama Sukanori, offering his surrender. It was refused, and so taking his cue from Tang and Qiu, Yongfu boarded a British ship and left for the mainland. A Japanese cruiser, the Yaeyama, gave chase, however, and managed to catch the merchant ship in international waters. But a boarding party was unable to locate Yongfu, who had disguised himself as a refugee. Back in Taiwan, with nobody to head the republic, 2 Presbyterian ministers led a delegation to negotiate Tainan's surrender. On October 21st, the city was handed over without any fighting, and a week later, Kabayama announced that Taiwan had been pacified.